I'd like to thank, first of all, Professor Manatunga for the kind introduction. It had been a great pleasure to work with you when you were, in the campus, and also when you were the Director General of Archaeology. I'm extremely honored by the presence of Mrs. Renuka Iconography, Director of the SAARC Cultural Center, for your kind words. And also I am honored to have in the audience Prashanta Gundasekara and also Siddhārtha Disanayaka. They have helped me a lot in my research work. As you will see, this paper is also partly based on my research here. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to the SAARC Cultural Center and Department of Archaeology, University of Kelaniya, and of the head of the department, whom I met for the first time, to speak today. In this regard, my warmest thanks go to Dr. Bina Gandhi-Duroy, Deputy Director of Research of the SAARC Cultural Center, and to my good friend, Professor Anro Manatunga, Department of Archaeology, University of Kelaniya. I am also very honored by your presence. Thank you very much for coming, and also my colleagues and friends who are following this talk from abroad. I must confess that my today's talk is revised and expanded versions of the talk I gave at Vishwabharati, Shantiniketan, on Friday 13th this year, in memory of late Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay. I humbly dedicate this talk once again for his loving memory. Professor Chattopadhyay was for me a dear friend, and above all a brother with whom I shared my joys and sorrows. He was a Yuga Purusha, a man of conviction and integrity. As his vision of history was integrated with spatial dimensions of the past, both in physical and cultural sense, and as he believed that the historical landscape of India cannot be understood without incorporating the fertile lands of south of the Hindu Kush mountain range, he was very interested in the discoveries made there. With his vast knowledge, rooted in the deep commitment to the idea of plurality as opposed to monolithic approach in perception of the past and interpretation, he understood that the history of India cannot be written in isolation from the ancient past beyond the Indus. He was very much interested in Buddhist art, and I can still remember whenever I went to India, I never forgot to meet him at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. We would sit on the roof of his house for hours and talk about the new discoveries made in Pakistan and Afghanistan, despite the uproar of the planes flying over his house. He asked me to write a book on Gandharan art, which I did, and you could read it and make his comments a few months before he left us. Important events related to the life of Gautama Buddha are not homogeneously represented in ancient schools of art in South and Southeast Asia. And these differences are due to the confusion and irregularity of the way the events are narrated in sacred text. Among the many such episodes, the events related to the great departure of Prince Siddhārtha gave rise to a major confusion. My talk today focuses on the following events. What was the final motivation for the Bodhisattva Siddhārtha to leave his home and become a wandering ascetic? Did the Bodhisattva leave his wife and newborn son before becoming a homeless mendicant? Finally, how did he escape from his palace, well guarded by his father's army? The events surrounding the great departure of the Prince Siddhārtha, as described in the text, at times unnoticed by scholars, disparities in their depiction. Taking this crucial moment in the life of the future Buddha as my focus in this paper, I wish to examine how the Lalita Vistara, the Mahavastu, the Buddha Charita, as well as the Chinese and Tibetan translations of the original Sanskrit text of the Abhinishkramana Sutra and the Mulasravasthavadi Vinaya have inspired the Gandharan artists, their mentors. It is important to emphasize here that the Lalita Vistara, Sanskrit Buddhist text of great significance, was most likely composed in Gandhara, circa 150 CE. It is believed that 4 successive stages of its composition led to different versions reflected today in the Sanskrit text and in Chinese translations by Dharmaraksha in 308 CE and by Dibakara between 614 and 688. The Buddha Charita, Acts of the Buddha, more accurately Buddha Charitam, is an epic poem by Asvaghosha on the life of the Gautama Buddha by Asvaghosha, composed in the 1st or 2nd centuries CE. Of the poems, 28 cantos, the first 14 are extant in Sanskrit, complete, and cantos 1 to 14 in complete form. The Mahavastu, Sanskrit for great event or great story, is a text of the Lokottaravada school of early Buddhism. It describes itself as being historical, refers to the Buddhist monastic codes or Vinaya. Over half of the text is composed of Jataka and Avadana tales, accounts of the early lives of the Buddha and other Bodhisattvas. The Abhinishkramana Sutra, or the Dharmagupta biography of the Buddha, perhaps the most exhaustive of all classical biographies of the Buddha, with various Chinese translations, and is dated between the 3rd and the 6th century CE. The Mulasravasthavadi Vinaya exists in Tibetan 9th century translation and Chinese 8th century translation, and in some extent in the original Sanskrit. In contrast, the Pali Nidhana Katha, the introductory chapter of the Jataka Atthakatha, or the Jataka commentary, composed in the 5th century CE by Buddhaghosha in Sri Lanka, based on the older commentary in Elu or Old Sinhala, inspired the Kandyan period paintings of Sri Lanka, and to a certain extent, depictions of Buddhist viharas in Southeast Asia. I hope to point out on sensitive connections between the text and the image in both lineage. It's aiming at a great understanding of what is portrayed and why. For this presentation, I shall discuss the iconography for the major Indian Buddhist schools, such as Sanchi. I'll be mainly focusing on Sanchi number 1, which was built by Ashoka, but the Toranas were built during the Sunga period, dating back to the 2nd and the 1st century BC. And then Baharut, the stupa so far known, with the railings and the Torana, which could be dated to the 2nd century BC. Amaravati in Andhra Pradesh, starting from 1st century BC, going up to 3rd century CE. Panigiri, which was discovered quite recently in Telangana, former Andhra Pradesh, which can be dated also without any difficulty to the 1st and the 3rd centuries of our era. Nagarjunakonda of the Ikshvaku period, of the 2nd to the 5th century CE. Kanaganhalli, which was also discovered in 1960s and excavated until 1990s, with the railings, railings and the plaques, which can be dated from the 1st century BC to the 4th century CE, and Gandhara. As you know, Gandhara was in former India, south of the Hindu Kush Mountains. If you don't take the greater Gandhara, in today's Pakistan, north of Pakistan, especially the Buddhist art. Of course, Gandhara has a long history, but the relief that I am discussing today can be dated to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries during the time of Kushans, especially during the period of Kanishka. Their iconography will be compared with the 18th century paintings of the Buddhist temples of the Kandyan period. I'll be taking about 15 temples in Sri Lanka where the life of the Buddha is depicted. And there are murals from Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. The reliefs from Borobudur, a 9th century Mahayana Buddhist temple in central Java, are of great significance as the sculptors of this monumental temple follow the final Sanskrit version of the Lalita Vistara dated to the 7th century. We learn from sacred texts that in order to encourage the young prince Siddhārtha to become an earth conqueror and not to be attracted by an ascetic life, King Suddhodana, his father, arranged a marriage for the prince with a young beautiful princess named Yashodhara and built 3 palaces for the young couple. These are some of the depictions in Gandhara art. The Pali Nidhana Katha adds another detail that is not mentioned in known Sanskrit texts, namely, the prince was crowned as the king, which we see in all the paintings of the Kandyan period, as you can see here in the legend, Siddhārtha Kumarange Saranamangal Lisa Utturu Palandin. Yet, in the midst of these worldly pleasures, what made him to live his luxury life and become an itinerant Sanskrit texts give 2 different versions of why Prince Siddhārtha abandoned his palace, leaving his wife. According to the Lalita Vistara, the Abhinishkamana Sutra, as well as Pali Nidhana Katha, in the midst of worldly pleasures, Siddhārtha, having encountered a decayed old man, a man stricken by disease, and a dead man with multitude of relatives weeping and lamenting, and finally a mendicant dressed in saffron garments, understood the impermanence of life and decided to abandon his comfortable life in search of the truth. This is one of the most evocative sculptures in Gandhara art, depicting the encounters with the sick man and the old man. The Buner Stupa from Gandhara, which I published recently, unfold in the 3rd register from the top the important events of the life of the Buddha in a chronological order. This is the most famous stupa now because it is completely intact and the most complete stupa in the world. The life story of the Buddha is depicted and also the Buddhas of the past on the top panel. It visualizes A, the Bodhisattva enjoying worldly pleasure in the palace with his wife. B, leaving the city gate, riding a horse. C, immediately followed by the scene of the old man and a man stricken by disease. D, then Siddhārtha spending his final nights in the palace. The same stupa, following the chronological order given in the Lalita Vistara and the Abhinishkamana Sutra, depicts the great departure, which is E, immediately after the renunciation scene. A panel from Nagarjunakonda unfortunately partly broken, depicts the Bodhisattva in a chariot meeting a dead man and an old man. The other two encounters should have been on broken fragments. All these events are showcased following almost to the letter the narration of the Lalita Vistara and the Abhinishkramana Sutra. The Kandyan period painters also followed a similar sequence, mural paintings from the Maharaja Vihara of the Dambulla Raja Vihara, which is the second temple, and from Kathalua Raja Mahavihara, where 4 meetings are combined in a single frame. This banner is a copy of one or more of the wall paintings of the first Vihara, linked to the royal palace of Phnom Penh, destroyed in the years 1895. This was an exhibition I organized recently in Alençon in France. Adhémar Leclerc, who often refer to the iconography of this banner in my presentation, as well as the wall painting and banners from Thailand. 2 out of 4 encounters, elderly man and ill man, are depicted in the lowest register of the banner. Likewise, murals of Wat Wong Phrat Vihara, south of Thailand, dated to circa 1825, have vivid depictions of all 4 encounters. As you can see, from right to left, the sick man, old man, the dead, and the mendicant. According to the Lalita Vistara and the Mahavastu, the first meditation took place when Prince Siddhārtha was 12 years old. In other words, before he married Yashodhara at the age of 9. On the contrary, the Buddha Charita of Ashwaghosa report that he was 29 years old, meaning long after his marriage. As if to visualize the narrative of the Buddha Charita's account, all the interpretations of this episode in Gandharanath, the Bodhisattva is portrayed as a young man, not as a 12-year-old child. The Lalita Vistara in its Sanskrit form, set in the 7th century, says, when the prince had grown a little older, he went with the sons of ministers to visit a farming village. After seeing the village, he entered the park at the edge of the fields. The Bodhisattva wandered there in complete solitude. As he was strolling through the park, he saw a beautiful and pleasant jambu tree, and he decided to sit down cross-legged in its shade. In most mention of plowing scene, which is depicted in Dharanath. We shall come to this point later. The 7th century Lalita Vistara Sutra is the text that the artists of Borobhut chose when depicting the life story of Gautama Buddha. The plowing scene is not shown. The Mahavastu features another story. While the Bodhisattva walking with the royal entourage, he came upon plowed land where plows ejected the snake and a frog. A young boy who accompanied them took the frog, threw away the snake. Bodhisattva saw this and was deeply moved by the vision. No Buddhist iconography depicts the episode with the frog and the snake. The Pali Nidhana Katha has a different version of the first vision of Prince Siddhārtha. On the day of Plavin festival, King Suddhodana, leaving his house, which is great retinue, took his son, who was a child, as you can see on the pictures or the drawing by Sinhala. Son was a child, went to the spot. There was a jumbo tree, thick with leaves and giving a dense shade. Under it, the king had the child's couch laid out, and over the couch, a canopy spread inlaid of gold and a curtain hung. Then, leaving there, the king, Siddhārtha, clad in splendor and attended by his ministers, went away to plow. The future Buddha, who is still a child, looking all around and seeing no one, got up quickly, seated himself cross-legged, holding his breath, sank into the first meditation. Indian period painters of Sri Lanka depicts this story as the way it is narrated in the Pali Nidhana Katha. Needless to say, neither Buddha Ghosha's Nidhana Katha nor the Sri Lankan murals allude to a scene that had an impact on the young child's mind as described in Ashokghosha's Buddha Charita. All known Gandharan sculptures depicting the first meditation include the Bodhisattva sitting cross-legged in the shade of a tree. On the base of the sculpture from Saribalol in Gandhara in Pakistan is a peasant plowing the field with the traditional Indian plow, pull the two bulls. As we see, this and other Gandharan iconographies do not correspond to the narration of the Lalita Vistara in its Sanskrit version of the 7th century. On the contrary, perfect agreement with the narrative of the Chinese translation of the same Sanskrit text by Dharmaraksha. I'm extremely sorry for the French translation, but I will read the English. In the 3rd century. The 3rd century Chinese translation does not specify that the young prince was 12 years old, as the 7th century Sanskrit version does. It simply says that at that time, the prince became older and grew up. Furthermore, it mentions that the crown prince went with ministers to a village and observed plowmen and crows and birds picking the worms that had appeared on the freshly turned earth. Then, having learned that the plowmen were sowing seeds to pay taxes to the king, the prince, Siddhārtha, lamented the suffering of the samsara and decided to overcome. Is it necessary to point out that the Gandharan artist had followed the earliest version of the Lalita Vistara, which was later translated into Chinese by Dharmaraksha in the 3rd century? The Abhinishkramana Sutra also says that royal prince, seeing the tired oxen, their neck bleeding from the goad, and the men toiling beneath the midday sun, and the birds devouring hapless insects, his heart was filled with grief. Some Gandharan sculptures depicting the first meditation was consistent with the Chinese translation of the Lalita Vistara by Dharmaraksha of the 3rd century. However, some sculptures do justice to the Lalita Vistara in its Chinese and later Sanskrit version by depicting King Siddhārtha kneeling and bowing at his son's feet. It seems that the Gandharan artist opted to depict him in the form of a young man in accord with the Buddha Charita of the 2nd century CE, the version of Lalita Vistara that Dharmaraksha had in his hands before 265 CE during his stay in Gandhara. Let me emphasize again that Gandharan sculptures do not follow the chronological sequence of episodes as narrated in Buddha Charita, but recently unearthed Torana carvings at Panigiri in Telangana does justice to the text given in the put in the meditation and after pre-encounters. I have to precise, this was a very recent excavation which I visited with Professor Shritandra Ghosh in February. One of the beams of the Torana follow the sequence of the Buddha Charita. It was published by my good friend, Professor Paruldar. We see from right to left, the first three encounters, sick man, old man, and a dead man. The wandering monk wearing a saffron colored robe is not depicted because Buddha does not mention him at this precise moment. Three encounters are followed by the first meditation. Then, as one here we can see Suddhodana trying to drag his son out of the seat of meditation. Then, would expect the last evening at the palace is depicted just before the great departure. Finally, the great departure is staged with the horse of Prince Siddhārtha carried by gods and yakshas. This means to say that the Buddha Charita hitherto unknown similar texts had some inspiration on Andhra art. The next question that arises in our mind is whether Siddhārtha went forth from home to homeless state, leaving his newborn Rahula, his only son. Rahula was born on the day Prince Siddhārtha's renunciation. This is what we all learn at the temple. At that time, Suddhodana, the king who had heard that the mother of Rahula had brought forth a son, sent a message saying, "Make known my joy to my son." The future Buddha, hearing this, has come into being, all has come into being, Rahu Jato Bandhanam Jatitiyah. When the king asked, "What did my son say?" and heard that same, he gave command, "From henceforth, let Rahula, impediment, be my grandson's name." Narrative relates that the Bodhisattva sitting cross-legged on the couch saw the women who had earlier danced and sang, I quote, "with their stage properties laid aside and sleeping, some foaming at the mouth, some grinding the teeth, some yawning, some muttering in their sleep, some gaping, and some with their dress in disorder, plainly revealed as mere horrible sorts of mental distress." Quote ends. Seeing this, Siddhārtha ordered his groom, Channa or Chandaka, "I am resolved today to accomplish the great renunciation. Saddle me a horse." Banner in the Alençon Museum in France that you can see Channa with Kantaka. According to the same text, Siddhārtha thought, "I will just look at my son." And rising from his cross-legged sitting, he went to the apartments of Rahula's mother and opened her chamber. The mother of Rahula was asleep on a bed strewn with many jasmine flowers and resting her hand on the head of his son. Stopping with his foot on the threshold, the Bodhisattva thought, "If I lift her hand to take my son, she will awake, and that will prevent my going away. I will come back and see him when I have become a Buddha. And he left the palace. Respecting this narrative of Pali Nidhana Katha, murals from the Kandyan period in Sri Lanka, as well as those in Southeast Asia, intensely depict this episode. Now I'm showing you the banner from Alençon Museum, where you can see Rahula's mother and Rahula. And also the Walters Museum in Baltimore. Did Gandharan artists not attempt to depict Rahula at the critical moment when the future Buddha decides to leave the palace in search of the truth? In contrast to the Pali tradition, the Lalita Vistara makes no mention of Rahula's birth. The Lalita Vistara in the 14th chapter, that 4 encounters, the skinny old man, a man stricken by disease, a dead man on a palanca, and the mendicant dressed in brown garments, and a dreadful dream of Yashodhara, which frightened her greatly on the very night of Bodhisattva's departure, but make no reference to their son. The Mahavastu says that Rahula, departing from Tusita heaven, came down to the womb of his mother, Yashodhara, on the day of Bodhisattva's renunciation. The Mahavastu further says, the Prince Rahula stayed in the womb as long as 6 years instead of 10 months, was a maturing of an old karma. Among many others, the most naturalistic reason for the long pregnancy period is that Yashodhara was practicing religious austerities involving fasting and sleeping on a straw bed, which caused Rahula's growth to slow down. One of the karmic stories tells why Yashodhara had to bear a child for 6 years. In a previous existence, she had, instead of doing herself, let her mother carry a container of milk for 6 miles. The Mullisravasthavadi Vinaya, however, relates that Rahula was conceived on the evening of Prince Siddhārtha's renunciation, and that he was born 6 years later on the day his father attained enlightenment. The Chinese translation by Yi Jin of the same Vinaya says, I quote, at that time, the Bodhisattva, as he amused himself in the palace, got to think, quote, I now have 3 wives and 60,000 concubines. If I do not give them worldly pleasure, I am afraid that ordinary people will say that I am not a real man. I should now add myself with Yashodhara. Quotation ends. Therefore, Yashodhara became pregnant. The story of Asperna Sutra to explain why his daughter-in-law had to seek the womb. According to the Kashipiyas, Rahul was 2 years old and 15 years old when the Buddha returned to Kapilavastu. Rahul thus had the customary 15 years of age when he became the Buddha Charita simply relates that Yashodhara, bearer of fame, begot a son named Rahula for Suddhodana's son. The birth of Rahula taken in the palace when Suddhodana was entertained, when Siddhārtha was entertained by women in skilled erotic art. According to in confusion to the chronological sequence, Ashoka reports that Rahula's birth took place even before the Bodhisattva had first 3 encounters with the old man with a white hair clutching a stick, a sick man with a sodden belly, and a dead man in 4 men. The Gukwa Shionsai Yangon Sutra of the Causes and Effects of Acts of the Past and Present, translated by the Indian monk Gunabhadra under the song 53 says, quote, "The prince is said to have married at the age of 17 and impregnated his wife by pointing to her belly with his left hand so that he could leave the palace while ensuring the royal lineage as his father, the king, wished." Quotation ends. As discussed earlier, the Buddha Charita or some similar hitherto unknown texts had some inspiration on the Panigiri. However, even in this sculpture, not only Rahul absent, but even Yashodhara is not depicted. Since in the Buddha Charita, the birth of Rahula took place long before the event of the Great Departure. In Andhra art, in all the sculptures depicting the Great Renunciation or Mahabharishka, the Bodhisattva alone is shown seated despair in the middle of women lying as if dead. As a result, Gandharan artists do not attempt to depict Rahula at the moment when the future Buddha decides to leave the palace in search of the truth. These sculptures, among many, depict Yashodhara, the Bodhisattva's wife, asleep on high bed, without any trace of his son. Unlike the paintings of the Kandyan period and those of Southeast Asia, highly inspired by Pali Nidhanakatha, in Gandhanath, Rahula goes under radar. So here I am showing the release from the Buner Stupa, and there is no trace of Rahula. And here, the sculpture that I showed you, you can see Bodhisattva sitting on the couch and Yashodhara sleeping, and no trace of Rahula. As we have discussed earlier, many Sanskrit biographies of Gautama Buddha have Rahula remaining in his mother's womb for 6 years until his father's enlightenment as a Buddha. If this hypothesis is correct, there is no to depict Devi Rahula in the renunciation scene. Then the question arises as why the sleeping Yashodhara is depicted next to Siddhārtha. One may speculate with extreme caution, giving credibility to the account of the Mulasravasavadi Vinaya, that the Gandharan sculptors in depicting Yashodhara semi-nude are alluding to the conception of Rahula, which took place just before the Great Departure. We can also propose another, perhaps more likely, hypothesis. It is the dream of Yashodhara on the day of Siddhārtha's renunciation, as recorded in the Lalita Vistara. The text relates that Yashodhara, in her sleep at midnight, dreams the whole earth is shaken, from oceans to the mountain peaks. At midnight, dreams that whole earth is shaken from all the peaks, and the sun, moon, and stars fall from the sky to the earth, and so forth. Extremely by these bad omens, husband, Prince Siddhārtha, to explain their meaning, and to which the Bodhisattva consoles his wife. Quote, "Be happy and give you the omens are favorable to you." Quotation ends. Then the Tibetan translation of Abhinishkamana Sutra also relates that Yashodhara was greatly troubled in her sleep and had 12 dreams which disturbed her it suddenly fall down and perish, and the sun with the glorious light disappears, and the entire world is left in pitch darkness. Hearing this, Bodhisattva addresses her and says that the dreams are but empty products of a universal law, and requests that she return to her bed. Then Yashodhara, having the words of him, returned to her couch and slept, whilst the prince reposed by her side. The presence of the moon goddess that you can see with the crescent moon, and the wind god on some Gandharan sculptures may refer to the Maya. I'm just putting a painting from the caves where there is a depiction of the wind god. When Yashodhara falls asleep, the prince suddenly wakes up. Then the Bodhisattva summons Chandaka, asks him to bring his horse Kantaka to leave the palace and the misery of to become a in this context, to wonder whether or not Siddhārtha is absent from the scenes of great renunciation in Gandharan art. The next question the young prince left the palace well guarded by his father's soldiers. According to the Lalita Vistara, the Buddha Charita and the Mahabharata Sutra, gods, asuras, yakshas, and Kinnaras carried the horse on the Bodhisattva was sitting in order to prevent the city guards from learning the Blessed One's departure. When the Bodhisattva rose from his seat, the earth shook in 6 times. He mounted the supreme horse that resembled the full moon. The guardians, with their pure-like hands, then lifted the supreme horse. Sakra and Brahma went in front, showing the way, says the Lalita Vistara. Although the future Buddha is represented with anachronic symbols, not anthropomorphic, meaning not human form, the eastern Torana of the great stupa of Sanchi, the Torana is dated to the 1st century BC, visualizes this event theatrically. So I'm drawing your attention to the middle, where you can see the horse carried the gods leaving the palace. And then Buddha is not the Buddha, is in human form. He is sized by a chatra or a parasol. The gods are carrying the horse. The Bodhisattva is on the horse. And it continues, and we can see the horse is carried and the chatra over him. So they come to a point where the gods do not carry the horse, but means to say that he got down. So here we have, if you look at it very carefully, the Buddha Pada, or the sacred footprints of the Buddha, and Chandaka paying homage or saying goodbye to the Blessed Ones. And here we can see the horse going back without the Buddha, without the Bodhisattva, and Chandaka carrying the jewelry. And the story ends after 6 years of mortification. Sujata gives the first meal to the Bodhisattva. I have to say that some of the first art historians interpreted this panel as the carrying Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka, and which is a fake story. The anthropomorphic Bodhisattva, Siddhārtha, is carried by gods and asuras on Andhra panels. However, the Pali Nirvana narrates a different story. Bodhisattva sitting on the back of his horse with Channa holding his tail, jump over the 18 cubit high city wall. In can paintings, gods or heavenly beings lifting the horse, their hands are not depicted. Instead, the horse drifts in the air, carrying the Bodhisattva on the back, while Channa holding to the tail. I'm showing you another one with the legend Anoma Ganging Etoru Baba. So we can see the horse jumping over the Anoma river and Channa holding to the tail, which we never see in Gandharan art or art. But Nidhanakata further says, he away, but Chandaka hanging from the horse tail. This is the same tradition that the Nidhanakata then says that when the Bodhisattva flies from the lands of his horse, Mara came there with the quote, "Go on forth, sir. In 7 days from now, the treasure wheel will appear and will make you sovereign over 4 continents and 2,000 eyes. Stop, my lord." Quotation end. And Buddha, Bodhisattvas, who are you? And Mara replies, I am Vasavati or Vasavatin, was the reply. Well, do I know the treasures wheel, but it is not sovereignty that I desire. I shall become a Buddha and make the 10,000 world systems a world system shout by joy. Artists in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia depict this episode vividly. For example, here we have a depiction from Kathalur, and this is from the Walter's banner, where you can see the Mara appearing in front of him. And here the painting from Thailand and banner in the Allons Museum in France. The next important question, event in the company of the Great Departure is to be a farewell and Lanka. In the Sanskrit Lalita Vistara, Bodhisattva, having left his home, crossed over the lands of the Sakyas, Odas, and Mallas, and reached the country of Mayas. There he dismounted from his horse, Kantaka, and once he was on the ground, he summoned Channa, or Chandaka, and asks him to take his ornaments and his horse, Kantaka, return to the palace. The young prince, removing his jewelry and handing them over to Chandaka, and Kantaka taking leave, licking the master's feet, are depicted in both Gandhara and Andhra art. So I'm showing you the depiction from the Bunir Stupa, and here from the Kanaganali Stupa in Karnataka, where Buddha is depicted symbolically by the throne, and we can see Kantaka licking the feet of the Buddha, and he is returning with Channa. The Lalita and then we have Borobudur, as I told you, because Borobudur follows the Lalita Vistara of the 7th century. We can see Channa touching the feet of the Bodhisattva and leaving with the horse. The Lalita Vistara then narrates how Chandaka, leaving the horse Kantaka and carrying the Bodhisattva's ornament, returned to Kapilavastu. Seeing her son's ornaments, Mahaprajapati Gautami collapsed on the ground, lamenting, and said to King Suddhodana, quote, "Your Majesty, get my son back quickly." Quote ends. The sorrow in Mahaprajapati seeing her son's ornaments is also depicted in both Gandharan and Andhra art. So this is from Gandhara, and this is from Kanaganhalli. where you can see Mahaprajapati and Suddhodana and Channa with the jewelry and Kantaka. And also from the Buddhist, from Gandhara, we can see Channa with the jewelry and with hope. The Pali tradition, as revealed in Nidhana Katha, tells a different story that in the Candied in Sri Lanka, as well as murals and banners in South Asia. Advancing in this pomp and glory, Bodhisattva, in that one night, passed beyond 3 kingdoms and arrived at the bank of the river called Anoma. As you can see, Anoma Garing Etaravubabe. The Bodhisattva getting down from the horse back, so on sand to Channa, good Channa, go back, taking my ornaments and Kantaka. I am going to leave the world. The story told in the Nidhana Katha is somewhat similar to that of Lalita Vistara up to this point regarding the farewell. It changes when the Nidhana Katha says the Kantaka stood listening to the Bodhisattva as he talked with Channa and thinking, quote, from this time forth, I shall never see my master more. Quote, he was unable to bear the grief, and going out of their sight, he died of a broken heart and was reborn in Tavatimsa heaven as a Deva in Kantaka. So far, the sorrow of Channa had been but single, now torn with the second sorrow of Kantaka, return weeping and bewailing the city. To Gandharanath, Andhra art, Sri Lankan and Southeast Asian art preferred the Pali narration, and this is what we observe in their artistic creations. For example, we can see it Kantaka here and Channa weeping, and another painting from Phnom Penh, from Cambodia. We can see also Channa weeping. Here, this is from the Walters Museum in Baltimore, same story, and the painting from Thailand. Although I do not intend to discuss it today, the episode following the Great Departure are contradictory in the literary sources and differs in the different schools of Asian Buddhist art. For example, the earth goddess, Prithvi, who emerges from the lower part of the Buddha's seat to witness the merits of the Buddha in the previous lives, which is quite common to both Sanskrit and Pali traditions, plays a different role in Southeast Asian art. The earth goddess emerges from the earth, and by twisting the water from her long hair, causes flood and destroy Mara's army. The flood drowns the entire army, which is then gulped by sea monsters. As a Buddhist goddess, the earth goddess enjoys great popularity in Cambodia and Thailand. In Cambodia, she is known as Premae Thoron. The waters that gush from her long hair overwhelm the armies of Mara and symbolizes the water of the perfection of generosity of the Bodhisattva, Dhanaparami of the Bodhisattva Siddhārtha. In conclusion, I wish to emphasize that the stories of Shakyamuni Buddha narrated in Sanskrit text must be read cautiously. For over time, the texts have been altered and their final versions do not or too early iconographic reality. The changes made to the sacred texts lead to contradictions that make their iconographic representations even more confusing. In the past, many art historians have given preference to Sanskrit text when analyzing the life story of the Buddha or Buddha Charita. Yet, as I tried to demonstrate in my brief presentation, the impact of the Pali tradition, not only in Sri Lanka, but also in Southeast Asia, cannot be denied. Furthermore, one can no longer reject the existence of various texts completely lost today or to be discovered in the future, such as the Gandhari manuscripts predating the Buddha Charita, the Lalita Vistara, the Mahavastu, and other Sanskrit texts. As my good friend Richard Solomon correctly predicted, I quote, "It is no exaggeration to say that we are living in Buddhism. And there is every reason to hope that this golden age will continue for many years to come." With these words, I end my talk, and I thank